The after-work bar hummed with laughter and jazz when Emily spotted her friends waving from the corner. She let out the breath she'd been holding all day and threaded through the tables, the citrus scent of a passing drink catching in the air. She reached for a chair, already smiling, when a voice, loud and amused, cracked across the room. "Don't sit, careful. You'll break that chair." "You're too fat!" The room thinned around her. A few people snickered. Someone tapped a champagne flute like the line deserved a toast. Emily's hand paused on the chair back. The smile didn't make it to her eyes this time. "Are you serious right now?" Marcus muttered, heat rising in his voice. Jess called across the distance, steady and sharp. "Do you ever think before you speak? Or do people stop mattering once you can pay the bill without looking?" The man who'd said it, Adrian, all razor grin and watch light, shrugged like kindness was optional. A couple of his friends looked away, suddenly fascinated by their drinks. Emily inhaled. Not the kind of breath that feeds a fire, the kind that puts one out. She pulled the chair from the table and sat. Hands flat, spine tall. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Stay until the end. This humiliation becomes the decision that changes a life. "We are not giving him this night," she said softly. Lena's fingers found hers, a quick squeeze that felt like a promise. Marcus swallowed whatever else he was ready to throw, keeping it for later if later demanded it. The noise returned in pieces, like a song remembering its melody. Emily opened the menu with steady hands, though the words swam for a moment and the old ache pressed at her ribs. Shame arrived like a whisper and tried to settle in like a weight. She refused it a home. She lifted her chin. If he had been hunting for a flinch, he wouldn't find it here. She wasn't a spectacle. She wasn't a punchline. She was a woman who came to meet her friends after a long day, to laugh, to share stories, to be seen by people who actually saw her. "Mockery is cheap," Jess said, more to Emily than to him. "So is courage." "Sometimes," Emily replied, voice low but clear. "You just have to spend it." She set the menu down and smiled at her friends, small, real, defiant. Whatever had been stolen in that moment, she took back with the quiet act of staying. The laughter at the bar stitched itself back together, but not for Emily. It moved around her like a current around a rock, the water pretending the boulder wasn't there. She sat with her friends and kept her hands flat on the table as if she were pinning the moment in place so it couldn't sweep her away. "I'm ordering fries," Lena said too brightly, "and something ridiculous with an umbrella." "Make it 2 umbrellas," Marcus added, trying to hand her a grin. "We'll duel anyone who tries you again." Emily let out a small breath. "Please don't duel, just be here," Jess leaned in. "We are here, and we're not letting him narrate you." Across the room, Adrian laughed at something else he said, as if there were a mirror always held up to him. The mirror answered that he was charming. His friends answered the same. The ricochet of their pleasure hit Emily anyway. "He's not going to get the last word," Marcus said. "Not tonight." "He already spoke," Emily replied. "I don't owe him a better version of himself." The server appeared with water and a basket of bread, which Lena tore open as if breaking a spell. Butter sunk into the warm crumb. The table smelled like kindness again. Emily took a piece to keep her hands busy. Jess lifted her glass. "To choosing us," Emily tapped her water to Jess's wine. It made the smallest sound. From Adrian's table, a woman in a silver dress glanced their way, then back at her friends. Emily watched the woman's throat tighten around a swallow she hadn't meant to take. Maybe the woman had seen the first wound and was now watching for the second. Maybe she was used to pretending she didn't see either. "Say the word," Marcus murmured. "And You'll what?" Emily asked, gentle. "Teach him manners?" "He's already trained himself." "Then we teach the room," Jess said. She turned slightly, pitched her voice just enough to travel without shouting. For anyone wondering, what he said wasn't edgy. It was lazy. Kindness takes skill. A couple at the next table looked up, then down again, embarrassed by the truth spoken out loud. The bartender wiped the counter with the long, patient stroke of someone who sees everything and names nothing. Emily wanted to be that kind of steady. She swallowed and met the bartender's eyes. He nodded once like a small lighthouse from across the water. Marcus pressed his palms together. "Okay." We set a new topic. He looked at Emily. What's the best thing that happened to you this week? She thought of a tiny moment from that morning, a stranger holding an elevator for her and then saying, "I'm glad you made it." Not I held the door, but I'm glad you're here. For an instant she'd felt like oxygen. That, she said. Someone said they were glad I made it. I'm glad you made it, Lena echoed, voice wobbling into a smile. Especially to tonight. Emily smiled for real. It felt like the smallest rebellion. Adrian stood to go to the bar and their paths nearly crossed. He slowed, the apology never forming, the smirk ready as a reflex. Didn't mean anything by it, he said, tone casual, like tossing a coin into a fountain. Just a joke, Emily met his eyes. Jokes land better when no one bleeds, he blinked. The smirk twitched. He shrugged and kept walking, returned moments later with a tumbler that cost too much and tasted like power to him. His friends congratulated him on something Emily couldn't hear. Maybe they were just congratulating each other for being themselves in public. Jess pulled her chair closer to Emily's. You don't have to be a lesson tonight. I know, Emily said. I just have to be a person. Already are, Marcus said. The best kind. The fries arrived, hot, salted just right, steam curling up like a good mood. They ate with their fingers and let the grease be a comfort. Lena dabbed ketchup on her plate like an artist mixing paint. A couple at a nearby table leaned over. The woman said carefully, I'm sorry that happened. It wasn't okay. Thank you, Emily replied. Her voice surprised her by not breaking. I'm okay. You're more than okay, the woman said, and then color crept into her own cheeks as if she'd said too much to a stranger. But she hadn't. The word landed like a blanket over a drafty place. Emily tucked a corner of it around herself. Adrian's laugh rose and fell. A little spectacle bloomed, someone trying to impress someone else with a story from a yacht, a watch presented with a flourish like a merit badge. Emily felt the tug, the temptation to shrink so she wouldn't be seen as a counterpoint. She resisted. Shrinking didn't make rooms safer. It just made them emptier. What if we toast again? Lena said. But this time it's loud enough to shift the air. Jess arched a brow. Loud but classy? Always, Lena said. She lifted her glass. To everybody that has carried us here, to this table, to this day, to this moment. To every breath that kept time when we couldn't. To every chair that is strong enough and every heart that is stronger. A few heads turned. The bartender smiled. Someone clapped once, then again, then stopped as if applause needed permission. Emily didn't need it. She felt the room tilt back toward balance. She caught her reflection in the window, the curve of her shoulders soft and strong, the set of her mouth gentle and sure. The girl she'd been looked back through the glass, not accusing, just curious. Are we still in here? The girl seemed to ask. Emily pressed her palm lightly to the table, steady as a vow. We are. Marcus leaned in, low voice. If I write the best complaint email of all time, will you sign it? Absolutely not, Emily said, laughing. But you can write me a poem about fries. He snapped his fingers. A sonnet to salt, Jess grinned. I'll provide the footnotes. Please don't, Lena said. Love needs no citations. Emily laughed, a real laugh that started in her chest and warmed her face. A few people looked over again, but this time because joy is magnetic. Adrian's table quieted. Maybe the fun over there wasn't as fun as it sounded. The server returned. Anything else for you? Yes, Emily said, surprising herself. Your favorite mocktail. Dealer's choice, he lit up. I've been waiting all week for someone to ask me that. As he walked away, Jess squeezed Emily's shoulder. Look at you, starring in your own night. I almost let him edit it, Emily said. But I think I'll keep final cut. The mocktail arrived, jeweled with crushed fruit and a sprig of mint like a green flag. Emily took a sip. It tasted like summer making a promise. Across the room, the woman in the silver dress stood and walked to the restroom. On her way back, she paused beside Emily's table just long enough to whisper, For what it's worth, I didn't laugh. Emily nodded. For what it's worth, I noticed. When the woman returned to her friends, she left her chair pulled out a little farther than before, as if to announce the space a person takes up is not a problem in need of solving. The check came, and they split it the way they always did, fair and friend clean. When they stepped out into the evening, the air carried that faint city sweetness after a warm day. Emily felt the world widen again. The door of the bar closed softly behind them, like a page turned. On the sidewalk, Jess looped her arm through Emily's. "Where to?" "Anywhere," Emily said. She wasn't pretending to be unhurt. She was choosing not to be undone. The difference mattered. "Anywhere has good ice cream," Lena declared. "That's its whole thing." Marcus snapped a photo of the three of them. "Proof," he said, "that we occupied space and the sky didn't fall." Emily glanced back through the window once more. Adrian laughed at nothing. His reflection smiled back at him, loyal as ever. Emily's reflection had moved on. "Let's go," she said. They did. And the night, which could have soured, grew sweet around them. At home, the silence met her like a familiar room she hadn't visited in a while. Everything in place, everything a little dusty. She toed off her shoes and left them by the door. The city hummed beyond the window, distant and impersonal, the kind of noise that never asks how you are. She set her bag on the counter, poured water, and stood there holding the glass without drinking, as if thirst were a problem she could outlast. On the bookshelf sat a frame she rarely faced. Tonight it turned itself toward her, or maybe she finally turned toward it. The photo was from a dress fitting years ago. Her in ivory satin, laughter mid-bloom, shoulders unburdened by anything except the veil slipping off one side. She remembered the weight of the fabric, cool and hopeful on her skin. She remembered how the mirror had loved her that day and how easy it had been to love herself back. Then the phone call. Not even a call, a message. "I can't do this." 3 words that closed every door she'd opened. In the hours that followed, people kept saying you didn't deserve this, as if fairness could be patched over a crack wide enough to fall through. Flowers were unbought. A cake was canceled. Friends stayed close, but that kind of closeness has edges. Eventually, the day ended. Because days are disrespectful like that. They end no matter what you need from them. After, she built a life out of what she could control. Work was good for that. Work would never text that it was leaving. It would only text urgent and mean it. She climbed. She ironed her shirts to a knife's edge. She kept a spare blazer on her chair like armor. Promotions stacked like bricks. She told herself that structure was safety, and some days it was. On others, it was a wall that kept the weather out and her heart in. The body she lived in changed, too, in ways small and then not so small. Late meetings turned into late dinners eaten standing up. Weekends disappeared into slide decks and laundry. She stopped listening for hunger and fullness and started listening for deadlines. Photos began to feel like a report card. She drifted from the girl in the frame without hating the woman in the mirror, just forgetting to greet her. Tonight, the bar had forced the greeting. Not because a man with a loud voice deserved to shape the conversation, but because the words had found the bruise that never healed right. She carried her water to the couch and sat. The cushion gave beneath her. The furniture did what furniture is supposed to do, hold. She took a sip. Finally, the water tasted like something she needed and not like something she should. She opened the drawer of the coffee table and found the journal she kept starting and abandoning. The first page was a list of morning routines she never adopted. The second was blank. She smoothed it with her palm until the paper stopped curling. "Why did that hurt so much?" she wrote. She waited. The first answer was easy and loud. "Because cruelty always hurts." But there was another answer, too, quieter and more dangerous. Because part of me wondered if he was right. She put the pen down and pressed her fingers to her eyes until the sparkles came. Shame is noisy on the inside. It uses your voice to echo. She let it echo for a minute. Then she breathed until it quieted. When she picked up the pen again, her handwriting steadied. "I am not a punchline. I am not a before. I am not a chair's worst enemy. I'm a person who has survived more than one kind of leaving and still shows up for her life." She looked toward the kitchen where her tote bag leaned, brimmed with receipts and meetings and other people's urgencies. It struck her that she had become excellent at solving problems that did not belong to her. Excellence was a beautiful trap that way. It made applause feel like enough. She stood and walked to the bathroom. The mirror didn't flinch. She studied the line of her jaw, the curve of her shoulders, the tiredness that work had taught her to ignore. She lifted her hair and let it fall, not to check for beauty, but to check for presence. Her face looked back, not accusing, not pleading, just asking whether she planned to keep her promises the way she kept everyone else's. Back on the couch, she dated the page. Then she wrote in boxy, unmistakable letters, Year 1, "Come back to myself." She drew a square around it like a house. The list that followed surprised her with its plainness. Wake up to the sound of my own breath. Not an alarm I snooze 3 times. Move because it feels like freedom, not punishment. Eat food that loves me back. Sleep on purpose. Forgive the photo. Forgive the mirror. Keep both. Learn one thing. I've always said, I don't have time to learn. Go somewhere my resume doesn't matter. She paused at the last line and underlined it. Going somewhere her resume didn't matter felt like stepping outside the weather she'd built. And yet the idea didn't scare her. The idea exhaled. Her phone buzzed, messages from Jess and Lena and Marcus stacking like blankets. You good? We love you. Fries were medicinal. She smiled and typed back, home, I love you. I'm making a plan. A string of heart emojis arrived, then an unsolicited ice cream recommendation, then a meme Marcus thought counted as poetry. Emily set the phone face down. She turned another page. The noise of the city softened as if it respected ink. She let herself remember one bright morning from before everything went crooked. She and her mother had stood in a patch of sun, adjusting the veil, and her mother had said, "Happiness isn't a person, Em. It's a practice." At the time, Emily thought it was just one of those mother sayings that sound like fridge magnets. Tonight, it sounded like directions. The pen drifted again. Practice. Choosing myself when no one is clapping. Practice. Letting my body be a home, not a project. Practice. Believing that the girl in the dress didn't disappear. She diversified. She laughed a little at that last word. Diversified. Fine. If corporate language helped her walk toward herself, she'd borrow it. A breeze fingered the curtain. Somewhere below, someone called good night in a way that suggested they meant it. Emily closed the journal and placed it on the coffee table like you'd place a ticket where you won't forget it. She could feel the bar door closing behind her for real now, not because she'd escaped the memory, but because she'd chosen the next scene. Before bed, she opened her laptop. Bookmarks for flights stared back. Places she'd clicked when daydreaming, maps she'd traced with a cursor and then minimized. She hovered over one in particular and didn't look away this time. Not because she wanted a postcard version of herself, but because she wanted to interrupt the story at the place where it kept writing her small. She didn't book anything yet. She didn't have to. The commitment had already moved from wish to sentence. When she turned off the light, the room did not feel like a place she was hiding. It felt like a place she was leaving with intention. Lying there, she pictured the chair in the bar, the way it had held her without complaint. She thanked it, absurd as that was, for proving what needed no proof. She thanked her legs for carrying her past shame, her lungs for practicing steadiness, her heart for not mistaking one man's meanness for the world's verdict. She fell asleep not to the throb of the wound, but to the low, steady drum of resolve. In the morning, the mirror didn't look different. She did, not thinner, not prettier, just present. She poured coffee she didn't rush and wrote a letter to her boss in the clean voice she used when something was final. She folded it carefully, not like goodbye to a person, but like goodbye to the version of herself who believed survival meant staying. On the fridge, she taped the line she'd boxed and underlined. Year 1, come back to myself. It looked both ordinary and radical there, between a grocery list and a magnet shaped like a lemon. She smiled, practicing. On her way to the office, the city felt like a treadmill she'd finally decided to step off. She noticed everything she usually blurred past, the florist untying buckets, the kid dragging a cello case like a reluctant pet, the baker dusting a tray with sugar that rose like tiny weather. The world was doing its ordinary miracles without her permission. She took that as an omen. She rode the elevator with people who smelled like coffee and timelines. When the doors slid open, the lobby's glass and steel did its usual imitation of certainty. Emily crossed to her desk and sat in the chair that had shaped itself to her over years of Monday through Friday. Her screens woke up to charts and calendars that used to thrill her. Today they looked like polite strangers at a party she no longer needed to attend. She opened a blank document and typed without hedging, "I'm resigning effective 2 weeks from today." No explanations, no apologies, no bullet points to make it palatable. She added a simple thanks, the kind you give a building when you exit, nothing dramatic, just honest. She printed it, folded it into thirds, and felt the clean weight of a decision that didn't wobble. Her boss glanced up when she knocked, then smiled the way people do when they think your news is about them. Emily handed over the letter. "Wait," he said, scanning. "This can't be right." "It is. You're a month away from bonus," he reminded her, as if she had somehow missed the calendar. "We're short-staffed. The London presentation is next quarter. I know," she said. "And I've been excellent at being me here. But the me that got me here isn't the whole of me. I need a year, not for another job, for my life." He leaned back, calculating. "You'll lose momentum. I'll gain direction. This is rash. It's considered." He looked past her at the skyline as if the city might talk her out of it. "Can I counter?" She thought of all the times she'd negotiated on behalf of numbers and never once for her breath. She smiled, kind because she meant it. "I'm not a package to sweeten." When she left his office, word traveled the way it does in places designed to move information quickly. People stopped by her desk with two kinds of faces, the brave face of support and the worried face that asked on behalf of their own secret longings, how? She told them the truth. "I wrote it down. Then I honored it." At lunch, she took her sandwich to the tiny terrace she rarely used because she was always between things. The city glittered in the distance, pretending to be endless. She imagined a life where her calendar had blank fields wide enough to plant new habits. She imagined mornings that were more about a sky than a meeting link. She ate slowly on purpose, the bread a little dry, the arugula too peppery, and yet somehow perfect because she had time to taste it. Back at her desk, she started to tidy in a way that felt ceremonial. She emptied drawers of stashed snacks and pens that didn't work and brittle rubber bands that had outlived their stretch. She boxed up a plant that had survived purely on fluorescent willpower. She took down a framed quote that once got her through a rough quarter. "Hustle beats talent when talent doesn't hustle," and slid in a new line she'd scribbled on a sticky note. "Presence beats hustle when your soul needs you." In the copy room, her colleague Priya cornered her with eyes bright and worried. "Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay," Emily said. "I'm leaving before I turn into a clever ghost who haunts her own desk." Priya laughed despite herself. "What are you going to do?" "Learn to be bored enough to hear myself," Emily said. "Move because it feels like freedom, not penance. Eat food that loves me back. Sleep. Travel somewhere my resume doesn't matter. Maybe forget what day it is on purpose." Priya hugged her like a sister. "Text me when you remember the day, and it's Tuesday." After work, Emily carried her box out past security and felt lighter than cardboard allows. On the sidewalk, she didn't head straight home. She walked to the river instead and stood where the water kept its own agenda. She'd always loved bridges, the way they hold you while you change sides. She pressed both hands to the railing, not to hold on, but to feel the metal say, "I've carried heavier than this." That night, at her kitchen table, she opened her laptop and typed into the search bar like a dare. Retreats, beginner movement, reset, breathwork, learn to listen. A list unfurled, places with names like promise. She clicked through photos of morning light on wooden floors, bowls of food the color of gardens, people in loose clothes with faces calm in a way that wasn't empty, but full. Thailand kept appearing, soft as a suggestion and firm as a plan. She did the math. She checked the savings account she'd built out of discipline and the belief that one day she'd need courage financed. She had enough. The phrase startled her because it applied to more than money. She opened a new tab and searched flights. The first dates she chose were cautious. The calendar glared back with meetings she no longer had. She scrolled to a month that looked like a field. She picked a day that felt like a door. The total appeared. Her heart knocked once, then again, as if to say, "I'm here, let's go." She hovered over purchase. An old voice rose, the one trained by spreadsheets and fear and other people's sense of what was sensible. It asked about career arcs and references and gaps. Another voice, new, sturdy, still, asked a different question. What if the only gap that matters is the one between you and yourself? She clicked. The confirmation page bloomed like a sunrise. An email chimed. Then another. Itinerary, baggage limits, a cheerful note about adventure. She laughed at her screen, giddy and a little terrified, which is how you know you're not performing bravery. You're practicing it. She packed that same night, not because it was required, but because momentum deserved a drawer. Into the suitcase went clothes that didn't pinch. The good sports bra she'd been saving, the journal, a paperback she'd carried around for months without opening, a photo of the dress-fitting girl, not as a taunt, but as a reminder that both could live in the same frame. She left room on purpose. Before bed, she taped the index card back on the fridge, the one that read, Year 1, come back to myself. She added a second line in smaller letters, Day 1, buy a ticket. Then she drew a small square beside it and colored it in. She stood in the doorway and looked at the apartment's familiar geometry, the couch that had learned her shape, the table where she had chewed through countless emails, the lamp that made even bad nights look kinder. Thank you, she told the room, which was really a way of telling her past self, too. I'll send a postcard. In the morning, she woke before her alarm, the rare hour when the city hasn't decided who you are yet. She made coffee and took it to the window. Somewhere, planes stitched the sky into lines no one could see from the ground. She pictured stepping into one, letting it carry her toward a version of her life where the loudest voice wasn't shame or schedule, but breath. She texted Jess, Lena, and Marcus a photo of the confirmation email. Jess sent 17 exclamation points. Lena sent a packing list and a demand for a scarf souvenir. Marcus sent, proud of you. Also, hydrate. Emily smiled into her cup. She wasn't running away. She was running toward. The difference tasted like courage. The air in Chiang Mai felt like warm water poured over stone, softening everything it touched. Mornings began before the sun decided, the sky a pale ribbon unwinding over the hills. Emily woke to birds and the far-off chime of a temple bell, sounds that didn't ask anything of her except attention. She rolled out a mat on a wooden floor that smelled faintly of rain and lemongrass, and let her body arrive after the long trip her head had made alone. On the first day, a small group gathered under a roof open to green. They were not the kind of people found in fitness ads. They were the kind of people found in mirrors, hips and scars and laugh lines, knees that popped, shoulders that guarded old stories. The coach introduced himself as Niran. He had a steady voice, the kind that made you breathe slower without being told to. We are not here to fix you, he said, smiling like the sun was an inside joke. We are here to listen to you. Your body has been talking for a long time. We'll let it finish its sentence. They began with breath. Not performance breath. The kind that shows you can do hard things, but the kind that lets your ribs remember they're a cage for something alive. Inhale 4, hold, exhale longer than felt normal. It felt like borrowing time and paying it back with interest. When they moved, it was careful and simple. A step that noticed the ground, a reach that noticed the sky, a twist that noticed the spine's patience. Every cue was an invitation. Nothing sounded like a threat. Meals at the retreat were bowls of color that didn't apologize for their brightness. Mango that tasted like summer bragging, rice that steamed its own small clouds, herbs with names Emily mispronounced and then learned the music of. She ate without negotiating. No math, no bargains. Halfway through a lunch of grilled fish and lime, she realized she had not once thought about good or bad. The food felt like a conversation between soil and skin, and she didn't interrupt. At night, she wrote in her journal. The first entries were lists, what she did, what she felt, what she wanted to remember in case old habits tried to gaslight her later. Then the writing loosened, becoming letters to her body as if it were a friend who'd stuck around even when she wasn't much fun to be with. "Thank you for carrying me to the plane," she wrote. "Thank you for walking me across 10 years of meetings I didn't want but survived. Thank you for knocking loud enough that I finally answered. Not every day delivered triumph." On the third morning, during a gentle cardio circuit, her legs lit up with lactic fire, and she sat down hard, embarrassed by the sound her breath made as it tried to keep up. Shame reached for the mic. Niran reached it first. "Pause," he said, crouching to her eye level. "Not quit." "Pause is intelligence." "Quitting is the story shame tells," she cried, which mortified her until she noticed that sweat and tears looked the same from 10 feet away. No one stared. Someone tapped her shoulder twice, the universal sign for I know. "I hate starting at the beginning," she admitted, voice ragged. "You are not at the beginning," Niran said. "You are at this beginning." "We will have many. Lucky us." Another day she tried a short run on a path beneath tall trees. The air clung and the ground rose when she wasn't looking, and she stopped so often she joked she was practicing standing. But when she returned, socks wet with dew, she felt a pride that didn't demand a witness. She stretched on the steps and breathed until her heart remembered the difference between danger and effort. The group found a rhythm beyond movement. They learned to clap for each other without the polite restraint of strangers, full, delighted applause for small victories. A deeper squat, a steadier plank, a laugh that arrived sooner after a wobble. The sound filled the space like a fifth element. Emily began to clap for herself in her head when she made a choice she would have dodged a month ago. It wasn't noisy pride. It was gratitude expressed out loud. Between sessions, she borrowed a bicycle that had seen better chains and rode to the market. Women fanned grills. Men poured coffee through cloth filters that looked like tiny sails. She bought a handful of Long Gone from a vendor who broke one open and pressed it into her palm with a grin. It tasted like a secret. She watched monks walk barefoot in a line as the city bent around them, and she felt something shift, a respect for slowness that wasn't laziness at all, but precision. Her body began answering back. Sleep grew thick and honest. Her skin lost its office lighting and found sun. Hunger returned as a request, not a panic. She learned which muscles complained because they were waking up, and which ones complained because they needed kindness. On a week when the scale would have once been the judge, she never stepped on it. Her mirror offered a different metric. Her eyes looked like open windows again. On a humid afternoon, the retreat hosted a cooking class. Emily stood by a mortar and pestle as a woman named Dao taught them to coax basil to release its perfume and to respect the heat of chilies like you respect a spirited horse. "Taste and adjust," Dao kept saying, and it struck Emily that she'd long forgotten that cooking and living were iterative arts. You do not nail them. You listen to them, then change your mind on purpose. In a quiet moment after dinner, Niran found Emily sitting on the steps watching geckos argue in little chirps on the wall. "You move differently now," he said. "I move more," she joked. "Not just more, different. Less like you're asking permission." She turned the thought over. "I think I stopped treating exercise like punishment. I'm practicing it as gratitude." Niran nodded. Gratitude is strong fuel. Shame burns hot and then leaves you cold. There were days she wanted results, capital R, instant, photogenic. On those days, the old contract tried to renegotiate. If you do this, your body will give you that. But then she'd walk at dawn and therapy would come disguised as fog lifting off the hills. Or she'd catch herself laughing during a set of lunges because her balance had the personality of a baby goat, and she liked that about herself. Results were happening in the unphotographable places: patience, self-trust, joy that didn't need an audience. One evening, the group hiked to a hill where the city looked like a galaxy spilled at their feet. A breeze tugged at their clothes, cooling the day into something tender. Niran asked them to stand with eyes closed and place a hand on the part of their body they'd apologized to most. Emily's hand went to her belly, an instinct so old it had calluses. He asked them to say thank you instead, out loud. The hill filled with murmurs that sounded like prayer even to people who don't pray. Emily's voice shook on the first syllable, steadied on the second, warmed on the last. Thank you for storing the dinners I ate at midnight. Thank you for holding me when grief took appetite hostage. Thank you for forgiving me faster than I forgive you. On her final week, she decided to try the short run again, this time without timing, without mapping, without trying to architect a triumph. She ran until the trees changed shape, walked when her breath asked for a say, ran again because stopping had given her power rather than taking it. When she returned, she didn't check her watch. She pressed a palm to her heart and felt it thrum. Present. Not perfect. Present. She found a small ritual that felt like a hinge. After each session, she would stand at the edge of the open studio and bow. Not a deep ceremonial bow, just a nod that said, I see you, to the body that had shown up again. The girl in the wedding photo began to visit her memory, less like a ghost and more like a sister. Emily didn't try to become her. She invited her to walk beside the woman who could sit with discomfort and keep her own company. On her last night, candles flickered in jars along the path to the dining room. The group ate and told the kinds of stories that only arrive when you've moved together and then been quiet together. Gifts were simple. An elastic band someone no longer needed. A recipe written in a careful hand. A thread bracelet tied with 3 knots. One for strength, one for gentleness, one for return. Don't chase the mirror, Niran said as they hugged goodbye. Chase the morning? She didn't promise she'd never forget. She promised that when she did, she'd know how to find her way back. Breathe, move, feed, rest, forgive, repeat. When she zipped her suitcase, it closed more easily than when she'd arrived, even though she'd bought 2 scarves and a wooden spoon shaped like a leaf. What lightened it wasn't weight lost. It was permission gained. At the airport, she caught her reflection in a pane of glass and almost didn't recognize the posture, shoulders not braced for impact, jaw not clenched for performance. The beauty she saw wasn't cinematographic. It was fluent. She understood herself again. On the plane, as wheels left the ground, she pressed her forehead to the window and watched the green fall away into a quilt of clouds. She touched the thread bracelet and thought of the knots, strength, gentleness, return. She didn't know yet where the next chapter would open, but she knew how she would meet it, with a body that was not a project but a home, and a heart that had learned the choreography of staying. Cicely met her with sun the color of ripe lemons and a wind that smelled faintly of salt and old stories. She rented a small room above a bakery where mornings began with the sound of trays sliding and laughter that didn't care who heard. The owner, Signora Rosa, had the sturdy kindness of someone who could lift a flour sack and your mood in the same motion. Emily learned to say buongiorno the way locals did, like sharing a secret. She walked everywhere. Cliffs dropped into water so clear it seemed the sea had decided to be glass for a while. Streets zigzagged between whitewashed walls with laundry strung like prayer flags. Evenings were a soft argument between church bells and scooters. Life wasn't louder than in the city she'd left. It was closer. One afternoon, she followed a trail along the coast that promised a lookout and delivered a miracle. A high shoulder of land where the horizon stretched and the water kept changing its mind about blue. A man came around a bend carrying a camera and the kind of sunburn that proves you've stayed out longer than planned. He caught his toe on a root and stumbled. Emily reached out without thinking. He took her hand, found his balance, and laughed at himself in a way that invited her to laugh too. I'm Luca, he said, brushing dust off his shorts. His accent rolled the L like a small wave. Emily! He glanced at the camera. May I take your picture? Not for anything. Just to prove this light existed. She hesitated, then nodded. He didn't pose her the way she feared. No tilting chin, no orders to smile. He stepped back, stepped in, and waited. She looked out at the water until it stopped performing and started breathing. When he lowered the camera, he looked relieved, as if he'd found something he hadn't known he'd lost. They walked together back toward town, falling into the casual intimacy of strangers who are exactly what they say they are. Luca told her about the house he was restoring, his grandparents' place with a roof that leaked when it rained sideways and tiles that remembered more feet than his. He showed her a photo. Peeling paint, a courtyard fig tree that refused to die, sunlight making art out of brokenness. That tree is stubborn, he said, which is to say faithful. Maybe it knows what it's rooted in. Emily said. They parted at the piazza with a promise to meet later for granita from the shop where they judge you if you order the wrong flavor. She chose almond on his advice. He chose lemon because I'm loyal and boring. The shaved ice melted into sweet silk on her tongue. He watched her taste it like a chef watching a diner take the first bite. Days found their own rhythm. They rode a battered Vespa to small beaches where the sand squeaked underfoot and the sea whispered against a cave mouth. At a market, Luca haggled half-heartedly for tomatoes because he enjoyed the game. Emily bought a bunch of basil that perfumed her hands all afternoon. He taught her to drink espresso, standing at the bar like a local, one perfect swallow of courage. She taught him the American art of lingering over coffee and pretending refills are a right. Rosa adopted Luca the second time he came upstairs with Emily. "You're too thin," she decided, and fed them like a mission. They ate on the steps in the late light, bowls balanced on their knees, forks clinking sometimes in quiet companionship and sometimes in conversation that surprised them with its ease. Luca photographed everything except her when she wasn't ready, which turned into photographing her often, because she felt ready in ways she hadn't before. He showed her images on the camera's tiny screen, her hands breaking bread, her head thrown back in a laugh at a joke that hadn't been funny enough to deserve that laugh, her feet dipped in a fountain like a dare. She looked like a woman living, not a woman proving. One evening, a summer storm rolled in without ceremony. They ran beneath awnings that failed them one by one until they gave up and stood in the rain, soaked enough to stop caring. Luca lifted his face to the sky. Emily watched the water run over his closed eyes and down his jaw and felt something unclench inside her. Not a door opening, but a room expanding. They kissed the way rain teaches, brief and honest. Not fireworks pretended. Something steadier. When they parted, they looked at each other like two people who had just agreed to be careful with something that mattered. He brought her to the house he was fixing, apologizing for the mess. The floors creaked, and the air held the lime dust scent of new plaster. In the courtyard, the fig tree stood like a witness. Luca showed her the room where he'd found a section of wall painted by his grandmother, flowers that still held their color as if light had chosen loyalty. He spoke about the house not like a project, but like a relationship. This needs patience, that needs strength, that crack needs listening. Why restore it? Emily asked. You could find something easier. He smiled. Easier isn't always the right measurement. Sometimes ours beats easy. They made pasta on a night the kitchen barely had a counter. He taught her to roll the dough thin enough to see a shadow through it. She taught him to love the imperfection of the first try. Flour dusted their clothes and made them look like ghosts pretending to be alive. They were very much alive. After, they lay on the cool tiles and traded small for big truths. The time he ran from love and learned it followed anyway. The time she was left and learned she could stand. He didn't flinch at her story. He didn't try to tie it up or fix it with advice shaped like a bow. He just listened the way the fig tree listened, old, patient, present. When the morning came that her ticket out of Sicily turned from theory to plan, the knowledge did not crash the party. It sat in the corner like an extra guest, polite, waiting for its moment. She told Luca over coffee because telling him later would have been pretending. How long? He asked. A few days, she said. I booked it before I remembered I might want to stay. He nodded like a man who knows that wanting to stay and needing to go can belong to the same person. Then we have a few days. They use them the way thirsty people use water. On a hike up to a crumbling watchtower, they took turns carrying the heavier pack and making up history for the stones. On the last evening, Rosa insisted on a feast and roped in half the street to contribute. There were clams that tasted like the ocean telling the truth, and zucchini flowers that tasted like... After the plates were cleared and the moon did its work, they walked to the edge of town where the road stopped pretending to be anything but a path. The sea breathed below them. Luca reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in paper. Inside was a brass key, old and a little bent. It's to the front door, he said, which sticks unless you lean your shoulder in. I'm not asking for forever. I'm asking, If you ever come back and I'm at the market or on the roof or having an argument with the plumbing, let yourself in." She held the key and felt its honest weight. He wasn't trying to keep her. He was trying to leave the light on. "I can't stay," she said, softly. "I know," he said. "I also can't promise when or if." "I know that, too." They stood with the kind of silence that includes everything. She kissed him like gratitude. He kissed her like welcome. When they pulled apart, neither reached for assurances that would sour by morning. They were old enough to trust what had happened without drafting a treaty. On her last day, Luca walked her to the bus stop the way you walk with someone you hope to meet again. They didn't plan dramatic last words. They traded practical ones. "Drink water," he said. "Wear sunscreen," she said. He laughed. "You're very American. You're very you." The bus came. She climbed aboard, turned back, and held up the key. He saluted, 2 fingers to his brow like a soldier who thinks wars should only be fought for love. The bus pulled away. Through the window, she watched him shrink into a figure, then a smudge, then part of the landscape that still somehow included him. Back in her room above the bakery, she placed the key beside her journal and traced its shape on the page. Under it, she wrote, "Some doors open from both sides. On the ferry to the mainland, the water shouldered the boat the way strong arms carry a sleepy child." Emily leaned against the railing and let the wind salt her lips. She wasn't leaving happiness behind. She was taking a way of living with her. Walk toward what feels true. Stop when your breath asks you to listen. Say thank you to stubborn trees and honest kitchens. Let love be possible without needing to be guaranteed. Cicely receded into distance, not gone, just smaller. She touched the thread bracelet on her wrist, strength, gentleness, return, and smiled at the order. She had been strong enough to change, gentle enough to stay with herself through change, and now she knew how to return to places, to people, to her own steady center. Whatever waited back home, she would meet it without shrinking. The sea didn't ask her to. Why should she ask it of herself? She landed on a gray morning that smelled like rain on hot pavement and coffee she didn't have to rush. The city looked the same, glass and grit, cranes scribbling the skyline, but it met her differently. She felt taller inside her skin. Not because she was slimmer or more polished, though the royal blue dress in her suitcase would do its good work later, but because she'd practiced being present until it fit. In her apartment, the familiar clicked into place like beads on a string. She set her suitcase down and put the brass key from Cicely on the dish by the door, beside her own keys, as if they were already in conversation. The thread bracelet on her wrist had frayed a little at the ends. She retied the knots, strength, gentleness, return, without making a ceremony of it. On the fridge, her card still read, Year 1, come back to myself. She added a small check mark next to listen, another next to move, a third beside rest. Then she wrote a new line, small and steady, share. She texted the group, same bar tonight? First round on me? I have stories. The replies were immediate and loud in their way. Jess's screaming caps, Marcus's I'll be early and suspiciously overdressed, Lena's bring the scarf or I riot. When evening came, she zipped the royal blue dress like a promise and slipped on heels she could actually walk in. The mirror didn't get to decide anything, but it was allowed to enjoy the view. Shoulders open, jaw unlatched, a softness that had learned boundaries. She touched a bit of perfume to her wrists and behind her ears, more out of affection than camouflage. The city air met her at the door with its usual hurry. She moved through it without absorbing it. The bar was still itself, brass rails and low jazz, the perfume of citrus and ice. At the door, she paused long enough to feel her feet on the floor, a tiny inventory. Breath, check. Posture, check. Humor, check. Then she walked in. Jess saw her first. Her mouth made a perfect O, then turned into a grin so wide it made other people look to see what happiness looked like. No way! Lena's hand flew to her chest. You! Marcus stood so fast his chair skidded. Is this an upgrade or a resurrection? Both, Emily said, laughing into the hug that swallowed her. They crowded her with questions and touched the bracelet and demanded proof of everything. photos of the Thai market, the geckos, the lemon tree, the Vespa that barely survived them. She passed her phone around, each image a small postcard from the parts of her life she'd reclaimed. When the server came, she ordered the same mocktail she'd discovered on the worst night, and it arrived like a reunion. Crushed fruit. Mint like a green flag. "Tell us everything," Jess said, leaning in with notebook energy. "Not everything," Emily said, "just the true parts." She told them about morning breathwork that quieted a noise she hadn't realized she carried. About the woman named Dao who said taste and adjust as if it were a life skill. About the hill where they thanked the body parts they'd apologized to. She told them about making pasta on a counter that barely existed, about Rosa who fed people into better moods, about a fig tree that understood loyalty. She mentioned Luca, but softly, the way you speak a name when it has weight and light in equal measure. "And he gave you a key," Marcus said, eyes on the dish photo. "He did. Not to keep me," she added quickly, because they knew her old fear of being claimed like property. "To keep a door open, it's different." Jess watched her face and nodded. "You look like someone who knows the difference." They toasted, not to make noise, but to mark a return. The glasses chimed. The sound threaded something closed in her chest that had been open to weather too long. "Did you miss us?" Lena asked, mock-offended. "Every time I ate something so good it made me swear," Emily said. "Every time the sun got dramatic on the water. Every time I remembered who I was and wanted witnesses." "You have them," Marcus said. "We took an oath in Fry's. They talked and ate." And Emily let herself be as detailed as she wanted to be. Not because she owed anyone a travelogue, but because speaking her life out loud made it more real to the part of her that still worried she'd imagined it. She described the first run that felt like competence instead of punishment, the day she cried and didn't apologize, the night she slept so hard her dreams had to knock. Her friends listened the way good friends do, laughing in the right places, going quiet in the right places, handing her napkins before she asked. A woman at the next table, silver dress, familiar face, caught Emily's eye and smiled. It took a second for memory to surface. The same woman had passed by months ago to whisper, "I didn't laugh." Tonight she raised her glass. Emily raised hers back. Some circles closed quietly. At some point, Jess slid a small box across the table. Inside was a tiny charm shaped like a chair, simple, elegant, strong. "For your bracelet," she said. "Because it held." "Because you held," Emily laughed and blinked hard. "I love you in ways the English language can't file neatly." "Good," Lena said. "Neat is overrated." They were into their second round when the door opened and broke the room's temperature by a degree. Emily felt it more than saw it, a shift in attention the way a crowd pivots for weather. She looked up. Adrian walked in with his entourage, the same expensive ease, the same lacquered laugh. For a second, her body did what bodies do, checked for old exits. Then the new training kicked in. Breathe, name what's true, stay. He noticed her and double-took. He didn't recognize her at first. Then he did, and the recognition traveled across his face like weather changing. He said something to his friends. She couldn't hear, and peeled away with a drink in hand, that practiced half-smile ready like a line he'd used before. "Do you want me to run interference?" Marcus asked, already shifting. "No," Emily said and stood. "I want to speak in my own voice." She met Adrian halfway under a halo of bar light that had once felt like a spotlight and now felt like a lamp. His eyes did a quick inventory, dress, hair, posture, the way men trained by rooms like this perform interest. "Hi," he said, the word shaped like a compliment he had not yet chosen. "We've met," Emily said. "Last time you told me not to sit because I'd break a chair." He flinched, barely. That was a joke." "It wasn't," she said, not unkindly. "Jokes are funnier when no one bleeds." He looked past her to where her friends watched without hovering. His hand tightened on his glass. "You look," he stopped himself, probably proud of the restraint. "Different." "I am," she said. "But here's what matters. I was worthy of respect that night, too. If you want to impress a woman, start there." Something in his face softened, then scrambled for cover. I'm Sorry. I hope you mean that, she said. If you do, you don't need me to accept it for it to change the next thing you say to the next person. He nodded once, awkward and real. She stepped back, not fleeing, just returning. It felt like closing a tab that had played the same song too long. Jess exhaled when Emily sat. That was surgical. It was mine, Emily said, and reached for her glass. They resumed, the way a room resumes after a brief weather event. The music remembered its job. The bartender, who had once given her a lighthouse nod across the distance, slid an extra plate of olives onto their table and wandered away as if he'd always meant to do that. Tell us about the key, Lena said, tugging the conversation back to the bright lane. Emily touched the thin chain at her throat, where the key now hung, hidden, warm from her skin. It's not a promise, she said. It's a possibility. And you? Marcus asked. What are you? A person who keeps promises to herself, Emily said. Which includes making room for possibilities. Jess clinked her glass lightly against Emily's. Welcome home. Home, it turned out, wasn't a street or a lease. It was the feeling of sitting at a table where people knew your before and your after and didn't pit them against each other. It was carrying a body that had learned to be a home, not a project. It was the ordinary holiness of laughter that didn't need to prove anything. Later, when they stepped out into night, the city air had cooled. Traffic moved like a river that had finally found its banks. They lingered under the awning, reluctant to end the chapter even though the next one had already begun. Walk? Marcus asked. Always, Emily said. They headed down the block, 4 silhouettes tidy against the glow. Emily glanced back at the bar window out of habit. In the glass, she caught herself. Blue dress, easy shoulders, friends beside her, and also caught the room behind, Adrian at his table. Quieter than when he'd entered, the woman in silver laughing with her friends, the bartender polishing a glass that didn't need polishing, life continuing. Not a verdict, not a stage, just a place people pass through, learn something, and pass on. She turned forward. The brass key warmed against her skin. The thread bracelet ticked against her pulse. She felt the city widen the way the sea had, an invitation, not a test. She took it. Word spread along the bar the way warmth spreads through a room. Quietly, until you realize you've been feeling it for a while. People kept glancing at Emily, the woman in the blue dress with the friends who laughed like a home, and then looking away as if eye contact might ask for participation they weren't ready to offer. The music softened into something with a heartbeat. Conversation blurred to a pleasant hum. Adrian's table, meanwhile, performed itself. Stories, watches lifted like trophies. A joke that leaned on someone else's back to stand taller. Emily didn't watch, but she could feel the friction of it, the way you feel a speaker turned just too high in the next apartment. He stood. His friends leaned in, conspiratorial. He said something that made them cheer. Then he moved, not toward the bar, not toward his usual vantage point, but toward her. He lifted a glass on the way, the gesture practiced to suggest generosity when it was really about arrival. Half the room clocked the approach before he did. Attention behaves like a tide. Jess's hand found Emily's under the table, a check-in more than a warning. Marcus shifted just enough to suggest he could become a wall if a wall was required. Lena tilted her chin in a way that meant, you choose. Adrian stopped at their table, smile calibrated. For the most beautiful woman in the room, he said, placing the drink down as if he'd just awarded a prize. His gaze flicked to the key on the chain at Emily's throat without understanding it. He gestured to her friends. You'll forgive the interruption. Fate rarely waits. Emily looked at the glass. It was expensive in the way some things try to substitute price for meaning. She lifted her eyes to him. We've met, she said. He breathed a small laugh. So we have, he said, and then leaning in just enough for his voice to lower into what he thought intimacy sounded like. And I'm man enough to admit I misjudged. People change. Emily stood. Not abruptly, not theatrically. The way you stand when your body has become a place you trust. Around them the room quieted by a degree, like air considering weather. People do change, she said, her voice carrying without effort. That's how we grow. But I think we should be clear about what needs to change here. A few heads turned in their direction, with the guilty curiosity of bystanders who didn't want to be implicated, but didn't want to miss the story either. The woman in the silver dress watched openly, her expression unguarded. Adrian smiled as if he were already forgiven. I was out of line. Let me make it up to you. It's not about making it up to me, Emily said. It's about how you show up for the next person you think you can score points on. She glanced at the glass. There isn't a drink strong enough to erase the way you spoke. That's not what I need. And it's not what anyone needs from you. He adjusted the cuff of his shirt the way men do when they want to fix a moment with a smaller, more manageable gesture. Look, I was trying to be funny. You were trying to be loud, she said, not unkindly. There's a difference. A ripple went through the room. Recognition. A few faces tipped in that way people do when someone finally says the thing everyone else is dodging. Adrian's jaw worked, searching for another angle. He looked to her friends, appealing to the social script. You want her with someone who can take care of her, don't you? Jess raised an eyebrow so sharp it could have opened a letter. She already takes care of her. Better than anyone you know, Marcus added. Lena didn't bother with words. She set her napkin down like a flag. Emily took a breath that grounded her feet to the floor. She didn't feel fragile. She felt tuned. Here's the part you should hear, she said, addressing him but allowing the room to listen. When you told me not to sit because I'd break a chair, I went home and met every story I've ever been told about my body and my worth. I did the work to separate what belonged to me from what belonged to other people's fear, performance, and laziness. I changed because I missed myself. But my worth didn't start when my dress fit differently. It didn't pause when grief rewrote my routine. And it did not depend on your eyes deciding to see me. Silence followed. Not the brittle kind, the attentive kind. The bartender stalled at the end of the counter with a glass he'd already polished, not wanting to break the spell. Adrian's mask faltered. Something like a flinch quickly filed away. You're right, he said, the words sounding new in his mouth. I'm sorry, he swallowed. I didn't think. Start, Emily said. Start thinking before you talk. Start assuming people are whole when you meet them. Start keeping your jokes where they don't make blood. She picked up the drink he'd brought and handed it back. Steady. I don't need this, she said, and I don't need an audience. This isn't a performance. It's a boundary. He held the glass a second too long, as if unsure what to do with a gift returned. Then his hand dropped. He nodded once, twice, something real moving through the rehearsed expressions. Okay, he said. Okay. He took a step back. I'll think. Good, Emily said. He turned to leave, then paused, that last tug toward his comfort script. For what it's worth, he said. You look incredible. For what it's worth, she replied. So does dignity. He blinked, almost smiled, then didn't. He walked back to his table, not defeated. Exactly, but smaller in a way that suggested relief. Sometimes losing a weapon is the first mercy you grant yourself. Around them, the room exhaled. A few people murmured appreciation. The woman in silver lifted her glass toward Emily in a salute that said, "Thank you for saying it out loud." Emily sat. Jess squeezed her knee. Marcus whistled once, low, impressed. Lena leaned her head briefly on Emily's shoulder like a cat claiming a sunspot. Not a performance, Jess echoed soft. A boundary. Feels like a spine, Emily said, smiling. They returned to their conversation, gentle, ordinary, important. Emily told them about Dow's phrase, taste, and adjust, and how it followed her into decisions. Marcus countered with a poem about fries he swore counted as literature. Lena demanded a Sicily scarf fashion show at the table right now, and Jess documented everything with the gleeful thoroughness of a historian of joy. In the corner of her eye, Emily saw Adrian speaking quietly to his friends. The performance had thinned. One friend looked contemplative. Another looked embarrassed in the retrospective way people do when they're finally seeing the shape of their own laughter. The woman in silver touched her friend's elbow and said something that made them both nod. The bartender approached with a small plate, orange peels curled like ribbons, a few olives, a wedge of something that tasted like salt-learned manners. On the house, he said, and then after a beat, on the human. Emily grinned. "Thank you. You're welcome," he said. "You'd be surprised how many rooms just need a sentence to feel better." "Maybe not as surprised as you think," Emily said. He tipped an invisible hat and drifted away. When the check came, they didn't rush. They lingered the way people do when they know a night has turned from good to meaningful and they don't want to break the surface too fast. Emily touched the thin key at her throat. It didn't feel like an escape hatch. It felt like a symbol for something she'd finally given herself, permission to belong wherever she stood. On the way out, a couple stopped them. "We just wanted to say," the woman began, nerves in her smile, "thank you. We have a daughter. She's 14. We're trying to teach her what you just modeled. Teach her she never has to earn respect with her measurements," Emily said. "Or her silence." The woman nodded hard. The man added, "And teach guys like me to shut up when our friends are being cowards." "Or to stop them," Marcus suggested. "Or to ask better of them," Jess said. They left it there. Not with a hug, not with social media handles exchanged, just with a shared understanding that the room had done a small piece of repair work and that mattered. Outside, the night air carried the kind of cool that makes the city feel freshly washed. Emily rolled her shoulders and felt the easy strength there. Jess hooked her arm through Emily's. Lena claimed the other side. Marcus walked backward for half a block, narrating their power like a sportscaster until a lamppost made a persuasive case for forward motion. "Reckoning accomplished," he declared. "Not accomplished," Emily said. "Practiced. Again tomorrow. Again after that," Jess nodded. "Taste and adjust." "Exactly," Emily said. They reached the corner where they'd split off in different directions. The light changed. They stepped forward together, then apart, then together again, laughing at the way cities choreograph you without asking. Emily glanced back once at the bar, its windows bright as if someone had turned the volume up on the light. Inside, people were just being people, better, worse, trying. She didn't bless the place or curse it. She let it be what it was, a room where a sentence had been spoken that might echo long enough to matter. She turned toward the rest of the night. The key warmed at her collarbone. The bracelet brushed her pulse. She didn't need anyone to crown her. She had chosen her own throne a long time ago and discovered it wasn't elevated. It was level with everyone else's, a chair, sturdy and ordinary, holding, a spine steady, a voice clear, a heart open, but only where it was safe to be. The door swung open and a draft lifted the edges of napkins on nearby tables. Emily didn't look up at first. She was laughing at something Marcus had said about fries deserving their own holiday. Then someone called her name across the noise, her name with sunlight on it. "Emily!" She turned. Luca stood there, travel rumpled, wind blown, a backpack slung over one shoulder and a thrill of relief breaking over his face. He moved quickly, scanning for her the way you search for land after too long at sea. When he reached the table, he stopped just short, as if braking against the possibility that he was dreaming. "I hoped it wasn't too late," he said, breath catching. "I told myself, if I can find the door, I'll find you." Jess covered her smile with her hand. Lena went very still. Marcus mouthed, "No way," and very much meant yes way. Emily stood. Her heart did the complicated thing hearts do when they recognize their own. "You crossed an ocean. I'd crossed too," he said, then laughed at himself. "I got on the first plane. Rosa packed me cookies. The fig tree approved." He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a small square of paper tied with a ribbon. He knelt, not performative, not rehearsed, just a man anchoring himself to the ground so the moment would stop spinning. He unwrapped the paper to reveal a brass key, nearly twin to the one that warmed against Emily's collarbone. "The front door sticks less when you lean your shoulder in," he said, voice steadying. "You already know that. This is the key to the room on the roof, the one where the light is ridiculous in the morning." He looked up at her. "I'm not asking you to promise a lifetime tonight. I am asking you to choose the next chapter with me. Come back, or let me come here. Marry me when it's time. Or say not yet, and I'll keep the door open until your yes knows itself. I can't do the part of life that's supposed to be lived with you, without you." The bar, which had once gone quiet for cruelty, went quiet now for tenderness. Somewhere behind the counter, the bartender stopped mid-polish. The woman in the silver dress pressed her fingers to her mouth. Even Adrian's table fell out of its own performance and into listening. Emily's friends didn't breathe. Neither did she for a beat. Then breath arrived, and with it the clarity she'd been practicing for months, the kind that's not the absence of fear but the presence of self. She crouched in front of him and touched his cheek, the travel scruff under her palm like proof. "You brought me a room with ridiculous light," she said, half laughing, half crying. "You maniac." "Guilty," he said, hopeful and unguarded. She slid her fingers under the ribbon and lifted the key. For a second she held both, Cicely's first invitation at her throat, and this new one in her hand. She felt what they weighed together, not possession, not pressure, possibility. "Yes," she said, soft but clear. "Yes to the next chapter. Yes to the door that opens from both sides. Yes to building something we don't have to perform to keep." Luca exhaled like a man who'd been underwater and had finally found the surface. He stood and she rose with him, and he kissed her, quick, grateful. The kind of kiss that says thank you